So we are on the move, but actually we will stay in South America, at least the first two panelists. We do understand that relations between Israel and South America became wonderful lately, but I have to admit that even before Netanyahu, there were contacts between this region and South America. And what is interesting is not only to look at the way those immigrants who came from the region were absorbed, but also the impact of this immigration over our region. And I can't, well, I have to mention the name Anton Saada. Everybody who is familiar with Syrian history and with the emergence of Syrian nationalism have to acknowledge the importance of an immigrant, son of an immigrant who immigrated to Brazil and then came back and spread his ideology of Syrian nationalism. And I'm afraid that many of the scholars who look at his thoughts, and you can't ignore his contribution to the development of national thoughts in the region, will focus on the German, Italian, Nazi, fascist, but inspiration, but ignore totally the fact that he spent most of his time in South America, and therefore what I think they had to do was to look at maybe local source of inspiration, something they didn't do. But we have young scholars with us, young students with us, as one of them maybe in the future will take care of this point as well. So we'll speak about Muslim and Arab immigrants, wave of immigration, and we'll speak about South America, and then we'll move to Turkey. Our first panelist is Hagai Rubinstein. He is a PhD candidate at Tel Aviv University. As an MA student at the Department of Middle East Studies at Ben-Gurion University, he wrote his research, his thesis about the formation of Muslim community in Chile. His current research, under the supervision of Professor Ra'anan Wright, is titled Between the Nakba and the Intifada, Diaspora, Transnationality, and the Chilean Palestinian Identity. Hagai, go ahead. Each one of the panelists will speak for around 20 minutes, if that's okay.
Thank you. Today, the size of the Chilean Palestinian community is in the center of a debate. Many voices from the community insist that the colonial Palestina has around 500,000 immigrants and descendants. On the other side, there are academic researchers with more moderate number of 200,000. Between those two numbers, it can be said that the presence of Palestinian ethnicity in Chile cannot be disputed. Throughout the last century, immigrants from the Middle East became an integral part of Chilean society. The Palestinians are the majority of the Arab immigration in Chile, and in present time there are at least 10 different organizations and social groups who represent them. In this paper, I will focus on the first 5 decades of the 20th century, from the early days of the Palestinian immigration to Chile until the last arrival of significant number of immigrants from the Middle East. During that period of time, Palestine was constructed as the mother homeland alongside Chile as a homeland. The three phases of this process can be examined by the establishment of Chilean Palestinian institutions, community activities, and public debate. Although the history of the social institutions should be carefully examined in this context, during that time the community was relatively small and the initiatives in the social space could represent shifts in the identity and self-definition among Palestinian immigrants. The Arabs that immigrated to Chile from the Middle East came from Bilad Hasham, also known as Great Syria, that today is divided between Syria, Israel, and Lebanon. Until the British mandate, the population of the area belonged to several different administrative districts of the Ottoman Empire. The Palestinians emigrated from a few specific villages, most of them from Bet Jala, Bet Sahur, and Bet Lechem. However, there was immigration also from En Karem, Taibe, Ramallah, and Jerusalem. The first to emigrate before the end of the 19th century were young men from the agricultural sectors. Those who did not have the money for the trip had to sell assets or ask for loans in order to pay for the third or fourth class trip. In some cases, the immigrants paid by working on the ship or in the ports. The motivation for making such effort was due to several reasons. In the majority of cases, the financial aspect was the push factor as a result of the Tanzimat, the Ottoman reforms of that time. In the attempt to improve the economy, Ottomans initiated steps that raised difficulties in the agricultural periphery. The immigration was an instrument for economic improvement, with the intention to gain wealth and return to the homeland in a different status, and perhaps change the life of the families that stayed behind. For others, the trip to the west was a way to flee the mandatory enrollment to the Ottoman Empire, to the Ottoman army, in which the Christians were sent to the first line of combat to be used as cannon fodders. The young men started their journey at one of the ports of Beirut, Haifa, or Iskandariya. From there to one of the ports of Europe, and after a few weeks of waiting, they continued to the Americas. In the case of the immigration to Chile, they arrived to the port of Buenos Aires, continued to Mendoza, Ciudad de los Andes, and finally Santiago de Chile. On their arrival, the young Palestinians had to rely on the goodwill of Chilean citizens. A few years later, they were those who helped their compatriots in the first steps in Chile. Two main comunas, districts, in Santiago were the destination of settlement, Patronato and Recoleta. We can see Recoleta, and Patronato should be around here. Areas characterized as immigrant districts, part of the periphery of the capital. They were also known as en el otro lado del río, on the other side of the river. And in some ways, the Palestinians were also on the other side, speaking a very different language, wearing weird clothes, and being Christian Orthodox. At that time, they were called by the Chilean population Turcos, derived from the passport that was issued by the Ottoman Empire. Although the Palestinians arrived with agricultural experience, most of them started by becoming peddlers, selling from door to door in the better neighborhoods and living in the poor ones. Every centavo was saved for investment or to be sent back home with letters telling about the opportunities that the new land has. Here we can see a picture that the researcher Lorenzo Hagai sent me of an Arab peddler from the start of the 20th century. The first organization established in Chile by the Arab immigration was Sociedad Otomana de Beneficia in the year 1904. Its establishment was the result of the impression left on Chilean society by the Arab peddlers. The Sociedad Otomana had as a goal to support the Arabs in Chile on a financial aspect, but also concerning the image of the Arab immigrant that was stereotyped as filthy, uneducated, and uncivilized. This society was the only organization ever affiliated to the Ottoman origin of the immigrants. It is also important to mention that most of the members of this group were Palestinians. 5 years later, La Sociedad Juventud Jomesiense was founded, with similar goals of support to the Arab immigrants, but differently it was based on Syrian immigrants. One additional goal was added, to support the families left behind in the homeland. In the second decade of the 20th century, the Arabs in Chile were under the influence of two important processes. The first was the consolidation of immigrants on the financial aspect. The other was the understanding of changes occurring in the Middle East. At that time, their homeland was affected greatly by the World War I and the Balfour Declaration. The future of the Arab Palestine was unclear as seen from Chile, and the division of the Middle East by the Treaty of Lausanne crystallized the presentation of the homelands in the eyes of the Arab collective in Chile. In parallel, the descriptions of Chile's economic opportunities were sent by the Palestinian men to their families back home. This was combined with the geopolitical situation in the Middle East. The two became main pull and push factors for the families of the first men that made the journey a few years earlier. A chain migration was produced. The pioneers became guides for their families, and the families that succeeded in their settlement in Chile formed the base for other families from the Hamulas and villages that they came from. Most of the aid was ethnic credit. The first pesos given to the new ones in order to help them start peddling. In an advanced stage, groups of immigrants formed associations and rented stores in order to operate them together. At the same time, the British Mandate of Palestine caused a change in the legal status of the immigrants. Until then, the Ottoman passport was valid and could be used to ask for residency or to travel back home. For the first time, Palestinians in Chile had to be recognized as Palestinians. The struggle for the new recognition brought the Palestinians to the conscience level of the public discussion. This could be well displayed by the community's institutions. In 1924, Asociación Comercial Sirio-Palestina was established, a financial institute that was one of the first to refer to Palestinian ethnicity in its title, together with Club Sirio-Palestino, established in 1926. The two demonstrated the tendencies to create ethnic spaces in the heterogeneous Arab population in Chile. Here we see the directory of the Asociación Comercial. But the most important group was created at that time, Palestina Sporting Club, or Club Sportivo Palestina, the ancestor of the football team Club Deportivo Palestino, a sports club that represented two aspirations. On one hand, to strengthen the Palestinian identity, but on the other, to act similar to other ethnic communities in Chile by embracing forms of local community organization, like Audax Italiano, we can see the symbol on the bottom, and Unión Española. Another instrument to mark the formation of a distinct Palestinian identity in Chile were the newspapers, written by members of the community. Dozen newspapers were published by the Arab immigrants. Both El Watan and Ashaq were published during the 20s and had dominant line of fortifying the Palestinian identity. News from the homeland, community events, and articles discussing Palestinianness composed a new discourse that balanced the two homelands. Palestine was la madre patria, and the mother homeland, and Chile, the homeland. A similar process occurred in the Syrian and Lebanese diasporas in Chile, partly on account of the division of the Middle East issued by the European countries. Until the mid-40s, the socio-economic mobility of the Arab immigrants and their descendants brought them to participate as equals in the Chilean society. In the industry, Chilean Palestinians found their spot in the top, especially in the field of textile. In the late 40s, the state of emergency in Palestine encountered the Chilean Palestinians in the prime of their integration. Many politicians, businessmen, academics, doctors, and lawyers were Palestinian immigrants or Palestinian descendants. Although the Palestinian identity had its place in the local social space, this ethnic group had lost the sojourner status. The plans to go back to the mother homeland were long gone, as the general status of this community continued to rise. In addition to the condition in the Middle East that were not welcoming, and I say that, of course, as an understatement. The term Al-Qadaya Palestinia, the Palestinian cause, was not common at that time, but the formation of this concept can be identified, as at the end of the 40s, the Chilean Palestinians are called to take part in defending their original homeland. Here we can see part of the paper El Mundo Árabe, that calls for volunteers to travel to Palestine to help the struggle. And here you can see a letter from the Mufti addressed to the Arabs in Chile, also trying to bring them to help. Instead, the community helped with financial aid and diplomatic pressure. There was a dispute between the Club Palestino of Santiago and Club Palestino of Valparaiso. The actions taken by the one of Santiago, that was the leading one, were viewed as not determined enough in approaching the international community. This choice of actions reflects two impacts on the Palestinians in Chile until that time. The Palestinianness relevance rose in the shade of the war in the Middle East, but at the same time, most of them were well integrated and practically Chilean. The mother homeland and the homeland became completing elements in their identity and not competing, as one can think. The refugees that arrived after the War of '48 were the last wave of immigration from Palestine to Chile. Their presence had an effect of reinforcement to the Palestinianness, and the stories of the war by the new immigrants had a central role in this case. The division of three phases I described in this paper is a new view in the research of Palestinian diaspora. In this brief presentation of Chilean case of Palestinian diaspora, it could be observed that the two identities, the Chilean and the Palestinian, are evolving simultaneously. The integration of Chilean society to the Chilean society, alongside what is referred in some studies as hyper-expression of identity, concerning the Palestinian one, of course, are both instruments in this evolution. The concept of two homelands that are combined in transnational identity display the steps that the Chilean Palestinians took in imagining themselves and their community. In the first years, the Palestinian presence in Chile in the first years of Palestinian presence in Chile, the immigrants were concerned about surviving and simply did not have the time to ponder on their identity. But after they did discovered their Palestinian origins, there was too much to lose in Chile. And for the descendant, the Chilenidad was part of their self-definition. The Chilean Palestinians were in fact Chilean. The imagination of Palestine as a mother homeland gave a frame of meaning to those who saw themselves as Palestinians, but the Chilean homeland was the tangible one. To close this paper, I will show a next video that I believe presents this idea.
Nací hace casi 100 años muy lejos de ti, en Chile. Nací hace casi 100 años muy lejos de ti, en Chile. A pesar de ello, nunca te he olvidado. Sé que sufres. El tiempo me hizo comprender cómo ayudarte estando tan lejos. Y lo estoy haciendo con mucha fuerza. Quiero que el mundo sepa de ti, de tus sufrimientos, de tus niños que no juegan, de tus jóvenes que viven frustrados, de las madres que sufren y de los ancianos que morirán cuidándote. Muestro tus colores con pasión, colores que representan tus olivos, nuestra sangre, tus penas, también tus anhelos y esperanzas de un futuro mejor. Soy palestino, un equipo de fútbol. Sí, un modesto equipo de fútbol. Ese equipo que nació para recordarte e integrarnos a nuestro querido Chile, que hoy cruza fronteras con el orgullo de ser tu hijo, con ganas de que pregunten por ti, que sepan cómo estás, que exista paz para ti. Desde este maravilloso deporte, el fútbol, puedo hacer algo por ti. Cada vez que salgo a la cancha sé que me miras. Quiero ser el mejor. Quiero ganar campeonatos, quiero levantar copas, quiero seguir mostrando tus colores al mundo. Quiero verte feliz.
Thank you very much.